face. Great to see everyone. And yeah, just wonderful. And tonight's topic, as you know, is unconscious bias. It's ironic because the person who suggested it can't be here tonight, but I'm hoping he'll get a chance to watch it on replay. And I will be honest with you, it's not a topic I normally cover. Hello all, we'll be without camera today. Who are you? Who are you?
Sonia, hello.
Hi, Sonia. How are you? You're back from your travels. Great.
So actually, I'm in Istria, so I'm in the front of the house, and kind of there are some people as well. So I won't turn on the camera, but we are listening you. So two more people.
Nice. Hello, two more people. How are you?
Mirna.
So welcome.
I would thank
you. You came again. That's great. Bruce, always good to see you. But I was just wondering where the cup of coffee was. I would be very disappointed otherwise. So you guys, I think you all know me. One of the things that Joshua knows about me is that I used to be a professional singer, which is how we met, which is kind of extraordinary because he saw me doing a rock tour. Is that right? Did you know? How did you see me, Joshua? Was that just, was I on the road or did you see me on a video?
Marillion DVD.
Marillion DVD.
1987.
Lorelei?
Yeah, exactly.
Screaming my head off. It was fun. Those were the days. So not a lot of you know that about me. Started out in the music business, retrained as a teacher, retrained as a teacher of the deaf, retrained as a coach, retrained as a trainer. So don't ever let anyone tell you you can't change your life. It's just simply not true. And as all of you mostly know, I'm 65 years old. I still feel like I have tons to contribute to the world, and I'm super, super excited about it. I've also practiced Buddhism for over 30 years, had a leadership responsibility within that, and that's informed a lot of what I know and understand about life. So for better or for worse. And it's great. I love it. So what I'm going to do tonight is I am going to go through a sort of presentation on unconscious bias. And I had a really interesting question from someone on Facebook. Was this about Black Lives Matter? And well, it could be, but it's not. That isn't what I had planned at all. I wanted to generally think about unconscious bias and maybe start with some examples from the workplace, but thank you, Sonia. So I was going to say thank you, iPhone. That just sounds rude. So, you know, when we see someone, when we hear their accent, I'm sure, you know, people hear my accent, I'm American, there's some kind of bias going on there, conscious or unconscious, depending on your color, your age, you know, saying that I'm 65, immediately there could be a bias, you see. I just don't buy into it. I actually don't believe it. I don't believe it's true. So, you know, what we believe has huge power over our lives, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about really our own unconscious biases and how we can just bring them into our awareness. And I think you know that I quoted a book called Rebel Ideas a couple of presentations ago, and it is a really fascinating book, and I might throw that into here in bits and pieces. So, you know, the first question, I guess, is what is unconscious bias? So I'm curious to know, what do you think it is, if anyone's brave enough to just raise their hand and have a stab at it, because I have a definition written down, but you might have a view about what you think it is. And if you do, then great. And if you don't, then you'll learn a lot, hopefully. Anyone? Eva.
Hello, everyone. So there was an amazing lyrics in your song, and it came to me. It's a wonderful definition of what this is. And it was said in the song or sung, free your mind, don't be so shallow. Or we might even say, don't be so shadow. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
So in a way, it's about digging deeper within what's inside of you.
absolutely. Digging deeper beyond what?
Beyond what's conscious. I mean, you might have a belief that within the time you realize it's limiting you. So it's a limiting belief. And once you name it, once you recognize that, you can dig into it.
Yeah, you can become more free for sure. So free your mind. Absolutely. So the way it's defined in the dictionary is unconscious bias is defined as prejudice in favor or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. And I would challenge anyone to say that they don't do that from time to time. I'm hyper conscious of it, but a little bit at a loss sometimes as to how to stop it, apart from bringing it into my awareness and unpacking it. So thank you, Eva. That's right. You know, free your mind. Free your mind from, you know, the unconscious saboteur. So our brains are quick to make associations, which result in unconscious bias. So how does this work, or not work, if you want to put it another way? Our amazing subconscious mind is light years faster than our rational mind. It's much, much faster. It's just sitting there. You're on autopilot most of the time, but you don't even know it. And it uses shortcuts to make decisions based on our social backgrounds, our personal experiences, and our cultural environments, causing us to make almost instantaneous decisions about everything around us. That's pretty intense, wouldn't you say? Instantaneous decisions. So the problem is, it's often full of crap. It's often wrong, what we think. So I'm sure that as you're listening to this, you're thinking, where do I have unconscious bias? And I just notice it all the time. And, you know, how does this happen? Well, because in the wake of its awesome speed, the very quick speed of the subconscious mind, it often bypasses the rational mind. So before you've had a racist thought, a sexist thought, an anti-religious thought, a thought about you don't like the way someone dresses or the way they speak or the way they show up in the world, it's happening so fast that your mind, you don't have time to reason yourself out of it. And the reason this is significant is because we're making snap judgments about people all the time. I was sitting on an interview at my job recently, and we had someone who seemed incredibly nice. She was smiley, she was energetic, and all this stuff. And both myself and my colleague thought she was going to be great, only to discover that actually she was, the next call we saw her on, you know, she was saying things like, this is unacceptable. And of course, people have a right to an opinion, but we were both so taken aback. And I think we were drawn in by our unconscious bias. So another example of this would be men choosing men for important roles. And this is something that I've mentioned before in his fantastic book, Rebel Ideas, Matthew Syed. And I really strongly encourage you to read the book, Rebel Ideas. He talks about the CIA and how it was all made up in the time of 9/11. It was made up with white, well-educated, what in England we'd call middle class men, but in America would probably be, you know, a higher level than that, professionally speaking. So these guys don't have a big frame of cultural reference. And when they saw bin Laden sitting in a cave, they thought, ha 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 ha, silly little guy sitting in a cave, you know, half dressed with a turban around his head. How's he going to make this happen? That's never going to happen. Now, if they had had a wider range of people in the CIA at that time, it's whatever you think about, you know, whether it was a conspiracy or whatever, 9/11. But if you take the traditional view, well, having such an homogenous group of men was a really bad idea because no one could see it from different perspectives. So this is how Matthew Syed starts the book, and he gives lots of examples of these things that we call echo chambers, where people are focused on choosing people like them. You know, and as I said on a previous presentation, you know, we already align ourselves with, you know, I'm a Democrat, you're a Republican. So all my friends on my Facebook page are going to be Democrats. And if they don't agree with me, I don't want them on my page. And likewise, the same for Republicans, which if you think about it, it's really dangerous because if we don't learn how to have dialogue and communicate, where are we headed? If everything is just so stratified, polemical, that's not really healthy because it doesn't invite collaboration. So, and many other reasons. So, you know, I'm sure there are many other examples you can think of. I was walking in the park with a friend the other day, and he saw some women in niqab, their face was covered, and he walked past and he said under his breath to me, "Oh, pretty face," you know, like to make fun of them. I was like, what? Why are you saying that? It's an unconscious bias. They're preconditioned, they're unobserved. And then I guess it's important to think how this might impact our work, our business, our relationships, our life choices. I think it's really important to consider this. So let's take the example of, you know, a corporation recruiting people to work for them, okay, for example, right? So you have, sorry, I'm having a little trouble here. I'm having a little difficulty. Bear with me. So, you know, when we're recruiting into a workplace, we want to achieve excellence. So we think that we should recruit accordingly, but it isn't really achieving excellence unless you recruit from the widest possible talent pool. Because if you don't have multiple frames of reference, things become very narrow, very monochrome. And, you know, when we have these interview situations in big companies, we limit the field of possibility. We don't look at it scientifically. Why did I choose that woman in the interview over other people? I have to ask myself that question. Was I like, oh, she talks like me, she acts like me, she thinks like me, she's a similar demographic, you know, of course she's going to be great. Well, that's not necessarily true. And so when we think in this way, we narrow down the fields of possibilities. So how can we remedy this? How can we change this? And actually, I think it's a good time for people to put answers in the chat box. How could we remedy this tendency? Say in the case of a selection panel for work, what would you do? How would you remedy that? Stay curious, love that. Absolutely. It is living in a bubble. Being aware. What do you mean by that, Jana? Being aware. Think before you speak is the core. Who thinks before they speak? The interviewers? think before they decide. Yep, invite a diversity of candidates, absolutely. And, you know, the great thing is in some places that's now mandate, which is good. I'd observe my emotions, and if there's one a negative one, I pay attention to it. Right, so again, that's curiosity, catching yourself early on the bias, not making instant judgment. Fantastic. So these are some really great ideas. So think outside of the box of a fit. Yes, what is a fit? What is a fit for your company? Really, really good. So some of the things I have written down here are question our instant judgment. Like, you know, I'm very intuitive and I do tend to go, oh, I really like them, let's hire them. That would be my style. That would definitely be my style because I trust my intuition and I trust my ability to read people. Double check your job criteria to be sure bias is not built in. Absolutely, Bruce. So question our instant judgment, deliberately slow down the decision-making. That's the other weird thing about jobs. They have these lists of questions. I mean, how do we know that the questions are the right questions? Reconsider reasons for decisions, question cultural stereotypes. That's really big. Check in honestly with ourselves for unconscious bias. So in a nutshell, you know, it boils down to environment and experience, beliefs, biases, filters, and behaviors. So I'm going to talk briefly about some different kinds of bias, unconscious bias, and I think this is really kind of interesting. So there's anchor bias, and this is that first impression effect, right? So the first information we receive affects all subsequent reactions, thoughts, and feelings. So for example, if you took someone like me, if I'm reading an application and I don't think the person's writing is very good, that's going to have an influence on me. Like, you know, why are they applying for this? And they can't even write a sentence properly, or they forgot to put the comma in the wrong place. That's just a little bit stupid, really, isn't it? So that's number one, anchor bias. And if you're interested in this kind of thing, it's probably worth writing this down. There's the bandwagon effect, which is we sometimes vote for the most popular candidate. Also happens at the stock market. Crucially, it also happens in meetings. I mean, it happens at horse races for sure, right? That's why the odds are the way they are. So that's the bandwagon effect. And then this is a fascinating one, choice supportive bias. So for example, iPhone over Android. I bet there are a few people on this call who feel really like I'm an iPhone user. I had an Android. I use iPhone because it goes with my computer. I can't even imagine using a PC. You know, I'm a completely devoted Mac user, and that's absolutely a bias. My brother is definitely a non-Mac user. He hates them and he will not buy anything that is an anything. Also, we have choice supportive bias, Brexit, a good example. And I'm not going to go into that one. Confirmation bias. This is one of the most widely committed biases. In other words, one of the ones that happens the most. We listen out for information that confirms what we already think we know. We actually interpret information in a way that confirms what we already know. And this is how echo chambers develop. And Matthew Syed talks about that a lot in his book. Like, you know, why are you only Facebook friends with your left-wing friends or your right-wing friends or your environmental friends? Or there is a big argument for having a group, of course, like, you know, a vegan group. There's nothing wrong with having groups who fight for a common cause, but I would only encourage you to look at what you're going to learn if you never stop to find out what the other person is thinking. And actually, you know, this whole thing I said last week about seek first to understand and then to be understood is so powerful. Then we have ostrich bias. So that's when you're in denial. So addictions, think addictions. So yeah, I have wine every night. There's nothing wrong with it. By the way, I do generally have a glass of wine every night, but if I had a bottle of wine every night, I should probably be a little bit worried. So it's like, this is what I do. This is how I roll. I'm just going to stick my head in the sand about it. It's too uncomfortable to challenge myself. So what else? Outcome bias. You decide whether an action is right or wrong based on the prospective outcome. So say you have a big decision to make and your gut says one thing, the colleagues you consult say another, you go with your gut, it works out. Now you believe that you should always just listen to your gut, even though the decision may have just been luck.
Sorry,
If
what was that
you-
one called? Sorry, Corey.
Outcome bias. So because you've had a positive outcome one time, the next time you try and figure something out, you are looking at the outcome. Oh, Jess has tried to get in again. Look at you all with your head down, taking notes. See, now I have an outcome bias that if I talk about something like unconscious bias, everyone takes notes. So blind spot biased. How biased are you? You're biased because of your awareness of bias. No worries, Jess. Those 5 liter glasses of wine. Yeah, absolutely. So let's see, what have we got here? So I'd like to sort of ask you, do you have areas of your life where you have biases that you're aware of? And there's negativity bias. Tell us about that, Bruce.
Okay, my perfect example of this one was I did a 2,200-mile hike on the Appalachian Trail about 10 years ago when I switched careers. And what I tend to remember is the one interpersonal conflict I had in the 6 months I hiked, and not the amazing other 180 days. We tend to remember and focus on the negative because that's what helped us survive back on the savannah millions of years ago.
How interesting. I never knew that. There you go. Thank you for that. So what arenas, and you can put it in the chat box again, in what arenas do you find that you have unconscious bias? Hard one because it involves being honest. I know that I have one, which is that for some reason, and my job is on the phone, and I absolutely know I shouldn't do this. But immediately, and my job is in sales. So if this is my day job, in addition to coaching and running training groups, immediately, if I hear someone talk with a certain education level, I'm going to say, I'm immediately thinking they're not going to want to do this course. They're not going to want to do EMF. And it's been proven time and time and time again that that's not true. It's not true. So why does that happen? We'll explore that in a minute. Why does that happen? One should finish university in order to be successful and get a job. Yep. in my work interviewing candidates in executive search. So Birgit, you mean that you only will interview people who are executives? Is that what you mean?
It was, yeah, no, the job was in executive search, but I interviewed candidates and I did probably exactly what you said. I always found the ones which were somehow similar to me in their character, more interesting than the others. And that's just natural. I like them more. And you don't have to like them. It's just if they are good for the job, but this like or not like always interfered with the decision who to take. So I think
It's
that's
really tricky too, because, I will only I won't take a job if I don't like the people. I absolutely won't do it. It's one of my top standards.
But I was only the middle person. I only interviewed candidates for a company, and eventually they went into the company. They didn't have anything to do with me, so shouldn't have been about me and what I liked. So that was, I think there was a very strong bias there in
Yeah.
my work.
And very honest of you to admit it. Jana, you said, I honestly can't think of any bias that I might have. Well, maybe after being on this presentation, you might find that you do. So here's how it works with unconscious bias. It's our environment, our culture, lots of things. So we're going to just unpack them one by one. So our environment would be our home, our neighbors, our neighborhood where we grew up. What were you taught? What did you observe and see? What did you participate in? You'll keep thinking and be aware for the future. Good job, Jana. So what did you observe and see? What was your environment? What did you participate in? I belonged to a tennis club from a very young age, as young as I can remember. So I had an expectation that that's how people live. They go to the tennis club and go swimming in the pool, and that's how life works, and hang out with other people who do the same thing, as if they're more suited to me. I'm not like that anymore. How were you disciplined or punished, and for what sort of reasons? What types of rewards did you get, and for what reasons and behaviors? Did you get an allowance if you're good? You get an allowance whether you're good or you're not. Peter Sage talks about this a lot in relation to your financial thermostat, how you were brought up and how much abundance or scarcity you think that there is definitely going to be determined by what your money blueprint was. That's really good, Eva. Yeah, money. I have tons, but since I started to work with it consciously, it's getting better, but sometimes occurs, especially if there's something negative happening. Yes, money. Money is a big one. That's a good question, Bruce. And if we haven't answered that by the end, we'll talk about that. What types of rewards? How did your family, your family and or friends regard those people in your neighborhood at the time? So other people in your neighborhood. I remember a family next door. They were called the Shakitas. The father was a doctor. I was friends with their little girl, but I don't remember going to their house very much. And I think that probably inclined me to think that they were weird. They're probably just normal people, and I thought they were weird. What's that about? And then do I go through the rest of my life thinking, oh, that's the spooky house next door? It's interesting, isn't it? So the next one is our culture. So culture is a big one. And especially if you happen to have close friendships or relationships with people from other customs and cultures, the ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular society or people, that's what culture is. A culture is a way of life of a group of people the behaviors, beliefs, values, and symbols they accept, generally without thinking about them, and that are passed along by communication and imitation from one generation to the next. Culture is symbolic communication. So if you know, for me, I don't practice Christianity, but I see a lot of people wearing crosses. I immediately make assumptions. Oh, they must be very Christian. Oh, therefore, you know, it's going to be hard for me to talk to them. It's going to be hard for me to connect with them, or, you know, a bunch of whatever culture people. That's another one. When I'm on my calls, I had one client in the last few days who was from Kentucky. Now, I don't know anyone with a Kentucky accent. So the minute I heard him talking, I was like, this guy's an alien from another planet that I don't know about. How am I going to create a rapport with him? It's much easier for me to create rapport with Europeans because I've lived in what was Europe for the last 40 years. But, you know, I don't know anything about people from Kentucky, or I don't know, places that have never lived. So I automatically assume I'm not going to be interested in the same things he's interested in. It's so interesting, isn't it? I think so. So, and that, you know, that's, and actually in relationships, that can become a really big deal. So another implication of culture is that we might feel very comfortable with people who look like us. We might even be inclined to acknowledge them, but not likely to acknowledge someone who really does not. Well, that's sometimes true and sometimes not. Yes, it's true, Eva, traveling opens our minds in a huge way. I feel very privileged to have straddled two cultures. Wow, Jana, so just getting through the week without being punished was a bonus. So how does that make you feel about Russians as a people? Do you consider that to be unique to your family, or is that something that you think, gosh, Russian people are brutal? I could think that because you've just said that. So resilient, yep, that's great. Does that mean that people who aren't punished are not resilient? That would be a bias. Yes, media bias. Okay. So we place more trust in people from our own culture. And I've seen this again and again, you know, a Spaniard meets I live in London, the most multicultural city in the world, I believe. And, you know, an Italian meets an Italian, and they're already bosom buddies. And my son's girlfriend is Spanish, and so she's very interested to talk to Spanish people. When I meet Americans in London, I guess I feel more at ease, more safe. So we do this, but it has no basis in fact. No basis in fact. So again, biases from our experiences, our history, our education, our religious background, our social exposure, and as Eva said, media influences, our media bias. So if you think of the history of the UK, my goodness, how might it color our worldview and our place in it? You know, superior, inferior. One thing that I found being in the UK, and this could be a bias, I don't see many English people who are willing to work in catering jobs. But of course, that's a bias, isn't it? Who am I to say who's willing and who's better and who's not? But it is based on my experience. But is it true? Does that mean if an English person walks in and applies for a job, you don't take them? Or, you know, I was married to a British person. It was a difficult relationship. Does that mean I could never meet a British guy again that I really liked? And how much is my unconscious bias going to inform that? So it's really important to understand diversity, seek first to understand, you know, where this might be showing up, and then seek commonalities with others is a good way forward. So here's what we need to remember. We have our views, which are filters. They come from our beliefs. They create our unconscious bias, and crucially, they create our behavior towards others. So I think that's kind of it from me for now, because I've talked for a long time. I want to thank you. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I see you've been really active in the chat. I will pause the video so that not everyone, for people, I can see Anna's waving her hand around vigorously, and we're going to let you talk, Anna, because I missed you talking last week.
Thank you.
Hang on, let me just pause.